It's always too long between the chats that I have with Paul O'Sullivan of Forensics for Justice. But we've got him today because there's lots to pick up on. Andre de Ruyter's books, the criminals who are hiding out here in South Africa, Lawtons, who have made an impact again in this country. And then I'd love to hear from Paul about the crime stats that were released this past week. Lots to cover in the next 20 minutes. Paul, I'm sure you paid a lot of attention to the reaction to Andre de Ruyter's book, given that you yourself wrote a book not long ago about the corruption that's going on in South Africa. The thing that struck me, a big point here, was the way he unpacked how the ANC's Chancellor House hijacked the construction of Medupi and Kusile from a legitimate builder, Alstom of France, to give it to Hitachi, who then paid the ANC a 97 million rand success fee. Now, you've had a lot to do with the whole story on that construction because of that company called Tubular Construction Projects, a fellow called Trinidade. Can you give us an update on that and where you are in it?
Well, Trindade, he's on trial at the moment. When I say he's on trial, he's like all the other trials. You know, it seems that the game that these people play nowadays is the Stalingrad strategy. They do everything they can to avoid having their day in court.
What do you make of getting back to the de Ruyter book? Have you had a chance to read it yet?
Unfortunately, I'm so busy at the moment, Alec. There's criminals popping up all over the place. And if I had the time to sit and read a book, I'm probably going to read it on the plane. In mid-July, I have to fly to London. So, you know, that's I can read a 300 or 400, I think it's 270 or 300 pages. I can read a book like that in 2 hours. So I'll probably read it on the plane on the way to London.
Let's just finish off with this company called Lawtons. It used to be known as Routledge's, which was fairly reputable. And then Hogan Lovell's, who you and Lord Peter Hain have been attacking because of their implication and their involvement in facilitation of state capture. You took an unusual step to write to the clients of Lawtons to tell them to dump this firm. What motivated that?
Well, I've gone a step further, Alec. Lawtons have gone and tied up with an African global law firm called the SAFO. I don't know what it is, but I've said that they're trying to sanitize their misconduct by joining forces with companies that do have a good reputation. Now, Hogan Lovell's had a great reputation until Lawtons came along, but they weren't called Lawtons, and they were called Routledges. In fact, they were called Routledge Modise. It was a fellow by the name of Lovells Modise who was the senior partner, and they managed to negotiate a deal where they became Hogan Lovell's South Africa. So Routledge Modise changed its name to Hogan Lovell's South Africa. I went after them in January 2018, and I canvassed the assistance of Peter Hain to help me to go after them. And the reason I went after them was because it was their clients that saw fit to kidnap myself and my staff, raid my offices, drag me off planes with my small children, and assault me, torture me, lock me up, and all this. And Hogan Lovell's South Africa were protecting those people. The chap in charge of all this hanky-panky against me was a fellow called Nklemeza. He was the head of the DPCI. He was unlawfully appointed. He's a criminal, and he was unlawfully appointed as the head of DPCI. So I was pointing this out. I was pointing out that the chief of police, a fellow called Pashlani, was also corrupt. So their way of dealing with that was to defend my allegations and then dismiss people like Shadrach Subir, Anwar Dramat, Johan Boyson. All the good cops were getting fired so they could be replaced by dirty cops. And, I stood up and tried to stop it. And for my sins, I was viciously attacked, dragged off to jail, my offices raided. Sarah Jane was kidnapped one day and detained. Lots of things happened. And Hogan Lovells were the common denominator. And not only were they having a poke at me, or their clients were having a poke at me, their other clients was Tom Moyani, who had infiltrated and taken over. And by the way, Tom Moyani is related to none other than Jacob Zuma. And Tom Moyani took over SAPS. And shortly after his arrival at SAPS, he eviscerated the criminal investigative capacity of SAPS. He went after Pillay, he went after Johan van Locherenberg. He pretty much shut down the criminal investigative capacity of SAPS. And that was because that capacity were doing targeting people that were involved in state-sponsored corruption and crime. So all this was going on, and Hogan Lovell South Africa, who are now called Lawtons, were managing that process of protecting all those people, including Makwakwa and his girlfriend, Elsie. So all this crime was going on. And every time something tried to be done about it, Hogan Lovells were acting for all these criminals. So I pointed it out to them. And then in January 2018, you may recall, we went quite public with it. That's 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago. So after we went public with it, Hogan Lovell's person in London flew down and read the Riot Act to the locals and told them, listen here, you must stop misbehaving. You must act like proper lawyers because you're causing problems for our name. And if you carry on misbehaving, we'll have to take the name Hogan Lovells off you. So you would have thought they would have started behaving then, but they didn't. They carried on misbehaving. And then, of course, Angelo Grizzi sat down at the Zondo Commission and related all the corruption that was going on at Bosasa. I'd already opened dockets against Bosasa and Vincent Smith, the then Deputy Minister of Prisons. And so I knew fully all the crimes that they were involved in. But we were all gobsmacked when it was announced at the Zondo Commission that Brian Biebuck, Nachal, a partner of Hogan Lovells, had used the trust account of Hogan Lovells South Africa to launder money to pay bribes. So that was kind of the final straw. The lady in London hopped on a plane and flew down here again and said, listen, you were warned. And now it's divorce time. And that was in May 2019. One of the people at that divorce hearing recorded it and gave me the recording. I kept it. I decided to have it transcribed, and I've now published it. It's on the Forensics for Justice website. It makes it crystal clear that Hogan Lovell South Africa was rotten to the core. Dirty lawyers running a dirty law firm. What did they do? They changed their name from Hogan Lovell South Africa to Lawtons. And of course, they lost 60 or 70% of their staff because their business collapsed. It imploded. And their staff scattered and went everywhere. Well, that's a problem because they'd installed themselves in one of the fanciest buildings in Joburg, at 140 West Street in Sandton. So I then carry on attacking Hogan Lovells, not realizing this sleight of hand. And just thinking, I thought, okay, Lawtons are just another law firm in the same building as Hogan Lovells. So I had a meeting earlier this year in February with the real Hogan Lovells. And they said, but Paul, you don't understand. It's not us. Hogan Lovell South Africa is now called Lawtons. So I thought, what? So I did some research and I saw that Bebuk's wife is still there. The main protagonists are still there. All the, I shall call them low ethics lawyers that were involved in propping up state capture are still there. And I thought, my God, how did they get away with this? Change your name and then say, no, that wasn't us. It had nothing to do with us. My hands are clean. Meanwhile, it's them. So I decided, okay, I'm going after them. And they haven't got the guts to even pick up the phone and say sorry. And I've said to them, my plan now is to wipe your firm out, to have a proper implosion, finish what I started 5 years ago. And they've now joined up with this crowd called the SAFU. I sat and plucked from the SAFU website the email address of every single partner and every associate, 65 of them. And I sent them a choice email yesterday telling them, this is the people you got married to. Now look what Hogan Lovell, it took Hogan Lovells 3 years or 4 years to realize that the marriage wasn't going to work out. How long is it going to take you? Well, I'm going to speed the process up, because if you stay married to Lawtons, I'm going to start writing to your clients, not just the clients of Lawtons. And guess what? I got a tip off yesterday. Transnet are using Lawtons. So I'm now climbing into Transnet saying, what the hell is going on? Why are you using a state capture law firm? So Lawtons now need to be struck off the central supplier database so that they cannot provide legal services to any government entity at all. But I'm planning to get my pound of flesh. I'm going to bring justice to them. And that's really the way it's going to happen. And if they think they're going to get away with it, they've another thing coming.
Paul, how much of this is personal?
Well, that's personal. My attack on Lawtons is very personal. You know, Alec, the one daughter was 8 years old and the other daughter was 9 years old. And I was dragged off a plane. We were on our way to London where I was taking them back to school. I was dragged off a plane with my two small children, assaulted in front of them, and then dragged away and detained and tortured for 4 days by Lawton's clients. Now, you know, the same people that if Lawtons hadn't have done what they did, although they were called Hogan Lovell South Africa then, it's still the same company. If they hadn't have done what they did, I wouldn't have been dragged off that plane, because I sat down with the Helen Suzman Foundation in 2015, and we launched an application against the Minister of Police, Natty and Gleko it was then, and won the application. And the application said the Anwar Dramat suspension was unlawful, which meant the appointment of Ntlemeza was unlawful, which meant Anwar Dramat was supposed to be the head of the DPCI. If Anwar Dramat would have remained as head of the DPCI, if Shadrach Sibia had remained as head of DPCI in Gauteng, none of the things that happened to me would have happened. Who got rid of them and who spent millions and millions of taxpayer funds to keep the criminals? Mokatedi, Major General Mokatedi, an unfit for duty person, a criminal himself, was appointed as head of Hawks for Gauteng. And Ntlemeza was appointed head of Hawks for the National. Pakshwani was appointed the acting head of the police. So we had 3 criminals running the police. And they targeted me. They wanted to teach me a lesson. I will never forget the day that Mokateri said, listen, the only thing you can do is pack your bags and leave the country. They wanted to escort me to the airport, and I must sign a form that I surrender my South African citizenship, and they'll let me off the hook. And I thought, no, to hell with it. I'm going to take you guys on, and we beat them.
Paul, in a conversation that I had earlier this week with Ian Cameron, where we were talking about the crime statistics, he said that there are now around 200 generals and 600 brigadiers. And by his estimation, more than half of these are not people who are qualified. This is in the police service. They're not qualified policemen. They were appointed there by the political party. They're cadres deployed by the ANC, many of whom, as you've just now articulated, I think you call them criminals with badges. How does one address that cancer within South Africa?
You ask the government to fix it. And if the government doesn't fix it, you change the government. That's the only way to do it. So I've repeatedly now been asking the government to fix this problem. If they continue appointing criminals as senior police officials, then we need to change the government. And then we need to, once we've changed the government, change the criminals that have been appointed in senior positions in the police. And the sad part about it is we've got some senior officers in the police who are the salt of the earth, solid people, rock solid. They will do everything they can to catch criminals and put them behind bars. But unfortunately, the pot has been tainted, that we have in that pool of brigadiers and generals, we have a percentage of people who shouldn't be in uniform, shouldn't be carrying a badge and gun. They should actually, some of them, be in prison. You know, if you look at the figures on the cases that Forensics for Justice have worked on, and bearing in mind we do all this free of charge and nobody's paying us to do it, I think I personally, I've been involved in these cases, took down Jackie Celebi, that's the chief of police, took down Pashlani, that's the chief of police. I managed to push through that Ntlemeza got fired, got Mokateri fired. We have currently 10 generals awaiting trial. Now, if you want something really good, Alec, and it's not been heard in the public domain before, the kidnappings for ransom that take place in South Africa is a shocking crime. And these people get, in some cases, it's minors. And I don't mean people with pick and shovel, it's children. They're kidnapping children. And they're keeping them and they're demanding huge ransoms. And then in some cases, they're torturing the people they've kidnapped. And they play the video of them being tortured, or they play the sound of them screaming so they can get their money back. Now, what have the police done about this? They formed a special unit. It's an anti-kidnapping unit. Who's leading it? A Major General Khan, who's supposed to be a Major General in Police Crime Intelligence, who was unlawfully appointed and runs a whole lot of private businesses in his spare time, earning millions of rand, flies around on private jets and drives Ferraris and Lamborghinis on car rallies, and he's now in charge of this anti-kidnapping unit, and the operational man in charge is a lieutenant colonel or colonel, Ismail Dawood. Ismail Dawood is currently on trial in the High Court of Johannesburg, wait for it, for kidnapping, torture, and murder. Now, when you have a chief of police that allows a person that's on trial for kidnapping, torture, and murder to be in charge of a kidnapping unit to stop all the kidnapping, the end result is mind-blowing. And the end result is that we're now having people kidnapped, and we're having family members of the cops that are supposed to be catching the kidnappers acting as go-betweens between the kidnappers and the family of the kidnapped victim for carrying the cash. And in one case, and we've got the evidence, we're not putting it out there yet, in one case, the ransom was paid into the bank account of a family member of one of the senior cops involved in the anti-kidnapping unit. Now, how the hell do you do that? Who puts that kind of a strategy together?
Criminal syndicate. It's been accused of a criminal syndicate, the biggest criminal syndicate. I think it was in Andre de Ruyter's book that he was told that he was now the head of the biggest criminal syndicate in South Africa at Eskom. But it appears as though perhaps the bigger and even bigger criminal syndicate lies in those who should be protecting us. Just to close off with, Paul, the Minister of Police, according to Ian Cameron, insists on calling himself General Tsele. Was he ever a general? Did he ever work through the ranks? I mean, is this guy a policeman? Does he deserve a rank of general?
He started out as a traffic cop, didn't he? He was a traffic cop in Durban. Now, then he became the head of the Metro, what do you call it, in Durban, the Metro Police. Okay, then he became the MEC for safety and security in Durban, or KZN. He was the MEC for safety and security in KZN. And then he was parachuted in. So he was he never came up through the ranks. He's not a proper policeman. He doesn't have any policing qualifications. He calls himself general. He's not a general. He was dismissed from the police. He was found to be unfit to be a policeman. Now, how the hell do you put a man like that in charge of the Ministry of Police? I call it the Ministry of Crime. And having a man like that and he spends all of his time jetting around the country on a police jet joined at the hip with the current Commissioner of Police. Now, there's supposed to be a separation of powers. There is no separation of powers. Masemola is supposed to be running the police. He was appointed to run the police in the knowledge that Chelly would actually run the police, and Chelly does run the police. He decides who does what and who gets what appointments. And it's shocking. It's absolutely shocking. And that's why during COVID, he was marching up and down on the beach in Cape Town. I can't remember what it was about, but I mean, and when he talks about the police, he says we. He's not a policeman. He's not a general. And it's a shocking disgrace. And by the way, he's a laughingstock of the police. When the rank and file in the police despise him and they despise his attitude, his arrogance. So, until we get proper leadership in the police and proper leadership in crime intelligence, the shocking rate that we have at the moment. I did some figures the other day. If I want to be a serial killer, providing I stop murdering after I've killed 13 people, the chances are I'll never be caught. Isn't that shocking?
Paul O'Sullivan of Forensics for Justice, and I'm Alec Hogg from BizNews.com.